Welcome to Straive's first roundtable conference. This is Felma Magnata, your moderator for today. Let us get to know more about each other's thoughts around peer review management, challenges, and opportunities. Are you aware that 60 to 70% of manuscripts submission gets rejected at peer review? Has any of you submitted a paper for publication? And was it accepted right away? You know, I remember talking to one of my colleagues recently, and we were looking at the trending of the daily numbers of acceptance, withdrawals, and rejections. Not any more surprising, but this year we seem to have noticed an uptick in the rejection rate. Are reviewers more meticulous about the quality of content lately? Or is it that there are more research with less substantial content? Perhaps substandard methodology or requiring further study? Today's session is for us to understand the challenges faced by editors, reviewers, and publishers in peer review, and if there are opportunities to improve the review process. But before that, please allow me to introduce to you our esteemed panelists. We have Jessica Rapper, Senior Director, Global Editorial Operations, American Chemical Society. Since joining American Chemical Society Publications in 2007, Jessica had held leadership positions across all aspects of editorial operations and new product development. In her current role as Senior Director, Global Editorial Operations, Jessica and her team oversee editorial and peer review services, editorial vendor management, and product management for a suite of publishing products, including American Chemical Society Reviewer Lab, American Chemical Society Author Lab, the Publishing Center, and Chem Archive. Hi there, Jess.
Hello.
Next,
everyone.
We have, thank you. Next, we have Diana Marshall, Head of Reviewer Programs, Taylor and Francis Group. Dr. Diana Marshall is Head of Reviewer Programs at Taylor and Francis. In this role, she works on projects to support editors in finding suitable peer reviewers and ensuring best practice in peer review, both through improving processes and developing training on how to be a peer reviewer. Before making the move into publishing, Diana gained a PhD in plant biology from the University of Cambridge. Hello there, Diana.
Hello, good to be here.
Last but not the least, we have Tasha Mellins-Cohen, Founder and Director of Mellins-Cohen Consulting. After 2 decades in scholarly publishing, Tasha is now an independent publishing consultant. Having worked with society and commercial publishers, Tasha has a deep appreciation for the changing pressures on publishers, funders, researchers, and research institutions, and uses that to partner with publishers to develop data-driven business models that will allow them to achieve a sustainable transition to open access. Hello there, Tasha. There you go, folks. And again, welcome, dear panelists. Let us get the ball rolling as we have some interesting questions lined up. For our first question, what is the biggest challenge being faced in the current peer review operations, and how are you managing this? Would you like to take this on, Jessica?
Sure. Okay. I didn't know you wanted me to start. Good morning and evening, everyone. It's really fun to see so many familiar names in the attendee list. So when we met last week as a group to sort of prep for this meeting, we were all pondering this first question, and in our original list, all of the above wasn't an option. We all were like, well, I wish there wasn't all of the above, because I think on any given day, especially given the circumstances over the past nearly 2 years, any one of those items could be the biggest challenge that we're dealing with. So I've taken some creative liberties with this question, and I think for us anyways, one of the most important challenges is in standardizing requirements and workflows, because making progress on that front enables us to scale and handle the increasing submission numbers that we're seeing, and to integrate with technology better. Having lots of different workflows and requirements across journals makes it really difficult to leverage all that technology has to offer. So for me, if I had to pick just one and it wasn't all of the above, I would go with the standardizing requirements and workflows option.
Thank you, Jess. Tasha, how about you?
So I've also been thinking about what I would choose if I can't have all of the above. And from my perspective now, not running my own peer review operation, but seeing how many different people are managing theirs, I would say that managing stakeholder expectations is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge, and not just the author's expectations or the reviewer's expectations or the editor's expectations, but also those of funding bodies and institutions, and in many cases the society that runs the journal, or the shareholders that derive value from the journal, because these expectations are all different. So authors, reviewers, editors, you would think that they would all want everything to go smoothly and quickly, but how they define quickly is very different. So you need to manage a balance between a speedy turnaround for the author and not bothering the reviewers and the editors too frequently with reminders that they have committed to do something. You might have a society journal where they want to bring on PhD students and postdocs as new reviewers and new editors, but then you need to train them, and you have to work out the expectations about what those individuals want from that training and from the experience of becoming involved with peer review. And you obviously need to make sure that you're maintaining the standards of the journal, not just from the peer review quality, but from the customer service perspective. So for me, I would say stakeholder expectations in all their many and varied and wonderful forms are probably the most challenging thing at the moment.
Thank you, Tasha. How about you, Diana? Would you have another side of the coin there?
Yes, I think similar to the others, all of the above was very much in my mind the first time I saw this question. But I think also because I think it has already come out, there's all these complete links between all of these different things, because as soon as you shift one thing, the other one shifts out the way. So as Jess was saying, at the point where you're trying to look at standardizing something, then the expectations of the people who are involved in that are all thrown off, and you have to manage that. I think if I was to bring out a slightly different angle, because I do think all of the above is important, I'd say one of the interesting challenges in implementing technology is that many technological implementations now work on the basis of agile principles and minimum viable products. And actually peer review is such a developed process already that the minimum is already very high bar. And again, if you're going to try and roll out something new in technological terms, you have to make sure that it's already advanced enough that it can handle the size of the submissions, that you're not compromising quality or time, that you're managing the expectations of what people can get from that technology. So yes, that brings out a different angle, I expect, but definitely all of these pieces are very interlinked.
Thank you so much, Diana. So pretty much we have three varying perspectives there: standardizing requirements and workflow, managing stakeholder expectations, and technology implementations, if I got it correctly. Earlier today, we've opened this as a poll question number 1 to our audience, and it would be good to see the results. Oh, they have another perspective. Is balancing quality and review time. Looks to be like the runaway winner here. I guess most of our audience have, this experience from the other side of the fence. So thank you so much. Quite interesting. Later, we will tackle this number 1 response here with our panelists. Thank you. Let's focus our attention to the second question. This is actually quite long, but I believe it will be very valuable for us to hear insights from our panelists. We have seen the growth of open access, an exponential rise in preprints, an increase in submissions during the pandemic, and a need to get articles published faster. How have some of these trends impacted the approach to peer review over the last 2 years? And in your opinion, are there any other trends that you have seen affecting peer review? Who would like to take this first? Tasha? Let us hear your thoughts.
I think Di wants to go first.
Dai, go ahead, Dai.
Oh, I am very keen to jump in on this one, because actually I think it makes a really interesting connection with the audience outcome that we just had, because I think actually balancing review time and quality is such a key part of what we're dealing with here, because throughout all of these developments, everyone is very focused on speed, how quickly we can get information out, particularly in relation to the pandemic. How quickly can we get advances out into the public domain so that they can be built on? But we've also seen what can happen if things aren't assessed properly, if there isn't that time to really look into a submission and to a published article, and what can actually go wrong if something hasn't been assessed fully or has been rushed out in some way. And I think that the focus, therefore, that comes out for us is how we can make sure that we can support editors, peer reviewers, those who need to do that assessment in ways that means that they can take the time that they need for the assessment. They're not rushed, that we're not pushing people to make hasty decisions, but we're looking instead for the dead time, the time when there's a gap that doesn't need to be there, or where we're putting support systems in place that can help editors to spend the time that they need to in their key areas. So we, for example, have a team of people who help editors with finding peer reviewers. Again, it gives the editor more time to focus on their assessment of the article and then getting the right peer reviewers in place according to correct peer review criteria. We're looking at services to help editors make that initial assessment and to give them information that will help them to do the kind of analysis they need. So I think that's where this balancing of quality and speed really comes to the fore.
Right. Thank you. Very helpful insights there, Diana. Would you like to go next, Jessica?
Sure, because I actually piggyback directly on what Diana said, because this was very much in my thinking about this question ahead of time. We've thought a lot about where we're not willing to compromise, even in the face of increasing submissions. And I do think that you have to put a priority on freeing up editor and reviewer time so that they can focus on evaluating the quality of the content and not some of the more administrative or mundane button pushing type tasks. So leveraging technology to help push reviewer recommendations to editors so that they're spending less time doing manual searches. Trying to streamline the process as much as possible. And within my group, we even talk a lot about what can wait until later in the process so that we're not bogging down review on the front end with some things around, for example, formatting, stuff that you can wait for later revisions to address so that you can, not sacrifice the speed element. You're not bogging down the editor with, concerns about cover art or table of contents graphics and things like that. So there's a balance to be struck there. For me, though, this also, especially as it relates to OA and in recent trends in funder mandates, I think this puts a really big emphasis on the need for clean and consistent metadata so that you can develop smart workflows to support authors in making the correct open access choices and also to report on and build relationships with funders and institutions. And everyone who works on this side of publishing knows what I mean when I say not clean or funky metadata related to institutions, funders, et cetera. So I think that's a challenge that everyone is grappling with. And there have been lots of solutions in this space over the last couple of years, but no real silver bullet, which I'll circle back to. I think there's a question coming up about our wish list. So I'll hold saying anything else on that.
Coming up, yeah. Tasha, would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. Well, I've been surprised by how slow the adoption of open or transparent peer review has been. So publishing review reports, for example, could be a really helpful part of determining whether content is really sound at the point of publication, and particularly referring back to what Di was saying about being able to be sure that the COVID content that we're publishing so quickly is really methodologically correct and adding value. Not publishing the peer review reports alongside what are usually open papers is slightly odd to me, and I was expecting to see a real uptick in that kind of transparency once COVID hit. Something that I haven't seen as well is any real in-depth consideration of peer review processes in fields outside of COVID-related fields. So a lot of physics papers, a lot of mathematics, economics, business, whatever, they haven't really looked over the last couple of years at what they're doing. And they haven't looked at things like rapid reviews for COVID-19, which was set up by a group from MIT to try and learn from what is being done in different parts of the community. I've been quite surprised by that. I was expecting such a global event to have a broader impact beyond just the fields that are directly affected. But that might be a bit over ambitious.
Thank you, Tasha. So 3 points I've taken notes here. Support to editors that we need to provide for them to have ample time for review, and then to produce high quality content, and then leveraging on technology. You mentioned about metadata, clean up at the earliest, Jess, and of course, Tasha, for the adoption of transparent review. Thank you there. Here's the third question, which is actually interesting and related to the initial questions that we have discussed earlier. How do you balance quality, review time, and better manage stakeholder expectations? Would you like to go ahead, Jess?
I go back to the all of the above on question 1. I think Diana said something earlier that really resonated with me about how interrelated all of those items in that first question we discussed are. If you start to tinker with technology or with requirements for authors, or I can't remember what some of the other options are, it's going to throw out one of the other areas, whether it be stakeholder expectations. It might slow your process down. You might have to reconsider how you're evaluating quality. So I don't have a solid answer here. I think my answer would be it has to always be a consideration. What changes are you making to business processes or technology, or everything in between that might have some unforeseen impact on the quality of your content, the accessibility of your content, the impact on turnaround time. So I think it just always has to be a consideration. And I would say, it might be an unpopular thing to say, that sometimes you have to be willing to move a little more slowly to collect the data you need. For example, we were talking about this related to OA and funding, or to ensure that what you're publishing, especially as it relates to things like the global pandemic, is of the highest quality and can be fully backed by credible and high integrity peer review. So I don't think that speed should always be king. I think you have to hold it in the balance of quality and all the other business decisions you're making.
Right, thank you, Jess. Diana, anything from you?
So I think I already talked quite a lot about quality and review time, but I think in terms of linking that back to managing stakeholder expectations, I think, well, Tasha just raised the great point about open peer review, and I think actually greater openness and transparency is so important in a lot of this here. If when an author submits to us, they know this is kind of how long it's going to take, these are the stages, this is where your paper is right now. And all of that is very clearly communicated. And if journals communicate, well, this is what is needed of you as an author before you even submit. Jess mentioned about file formats that could be waiting till later, but what information are we putting out there to make sure that authors know exactly what they need? I was on a discussion during peer review week with an early career researcher called Shruti Turner, who phrased it brilliantly. And she just said, you tell me what you want and I'll deliver it. So I think around some of these elements where it comes to the quality and the time, like if we tell authors what we want very clearly and we're transparent about that, and then we allow, and then that then feeds into the review process clearly, and then there's transparency back to the author, then that could actually make quite a lot of difference in a lot of cases.
Thank you. Tasha?
I think it's all been said. Being open, being transparent, and just being realistic about what is needed to get the quality.
I hear you all. Thank you so much. Before we move on to the fourth question, we'll accommodate one question from our audience. What challenges are faced with manuscript formats that authors are submitting? Anyone would like to respond to this?
Can I come in on this one? Personally, I think format-free submission is the way to go. 60–70% of articles are going to get rejected before they, what is the point in us saying to authors, waste your time formatting something to be perfect for us when, let's be realistic, if it gets accepted, it's going through an automated production process that will clean all of that up anyway. It's just unreasonable. I don't think it is fair for us to be asking people to format their manuscripts in a way that suits us from an editorial perspective that's probably 15–20 years old. I have had loud and vocal conversations with editors about this in many different companies, and it's not one I'm willing to back down on, I'm afraid. Bin the formats, let's just get on with reviewing the content.
Right. I can so relate with you, Tasha. Thank you so much. I hope that satisfies that addresses the question of our audience. Going on to our fourth question, the lack of strong reviewer pool and reviewer fatigue come up as common themes. What can the industry do to increase the pool of reviewers and support them? Interesting question for you, Diana.
I mean, I would definitely say training, but I would say that as somebody who actively runs reviewer training on a regular basis. I mean, I think training engagement is really important because, as came out earlier, if an early career researcher is getting into peer review, then they need some understanding of the expectations of being involved in that process, and also editors who are engaging with that person for the first time need to have a realistic expectation as well of the fact that they might not have the length of experience in the field, but actually they're really good. And so many editors I know say that early career researchers give them great reports. So I think sometimes there's this disconnect of wanting to increase the reviewer pool, but only with certain people, the people I already know as the editor and that kind of thing. Whereas actually what we need to do is we really need to pull the net wider. We need to increase the diversity of our reviewers in many different ways, in terms of career stage, in terms of geographical location. And what we need are ways which link up those people from those initial connections, like the training, into journals, which is something that we work quite hard at, is saying, okay, you've had your training, now let us introduce you to a journal, and the editor will know who you are, and the editor gets somebody who is new and engaged and very keen. And again, we see that people who have come through our reviewer training have a higher agreement rate when you invite them to review than if you just send an invitation out into the world and see what happens there. So I think there's some really important elements there about training and increasing the diversity of how we engage our peer reviewers.
Thank you, Diana. Jess, would you have thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, and I just was feverishly shaking my head in agreement with you, Diana. When we've looked at this internally, what we learned was that, the reviewers we were inviting were fatigued because we kept inviting the same pool of reviewers despite an ever-growing pool of authors, of global authors. And we just kept turning to the same tried and true people. And so I think it is really important to put a focus on diversifying your invitation pool in all ways: career stage, geographic diversity, gender diversity, et cetera. You really have to work hard at it because we're all creatures of habit, and especially an editor who's long in the tooth, they know the people in their field by name and they go down that tried and true list. So I do think it has to be something that you have to approach very deliberately and make a core practice for your journals, not just something that you can throw on as a nice to have. And then I second the reviewer training piece, and something we've talked a lot about here at ACS is how a lot of reviewers learn to review by sort of shadowing or contributing to a review that their advisor's been asked to provide. And so sort of being a second or a contributing reviewer to a peer review and being open to that. And so we ask that be disclosed to the editor, but a lot of people learn on the job that way by getting their hands dirty and really getting into review. So in addition to formal training tools, being open to opening up peer review a little bit more. And while I have the mic, before I mute myself, I just want to throw a really big ditto to what Tasha said about format-free submission, because I'm totally on board with that.
Thank you.
Thanks. So just to follow up on the question about diversifying reviewer pools, I'm aware of some societies who are doing some quite interesting things around reviewer diversification. One that I was involved with before I left the Microbiology Society was setting up a scheme called Reviewer Mentees, whereby we encouraged the people who reviewed for the journals anyway to engage with their postdocs and their PhD students and bring them on and literally co-review. The mentees, the junior staff, would get a reviewer credit through ORCID, so they would get recognition for their work, but we would also then know that they were qualified and comfortable reviewing, and they could become full reviewers on their own, but also it gave them an introduction to the journals. It encouraged them to engage with the society's activities, so it's quite a nice additional thing. And some other societies that I'm working with that I'm not allowed to mention by name have actually set EDI targets for their reviewers, whereby the reviewer pool needs to reflect the author pool for the journal in any given year. So if, for example, 25% of authors come from China, they need to be within 5% of that for the number of reviewers that are coming from China as well, which I think is a really interesting way of targeting the question of inclusion for review, because historically these journals have been run out of Western Europe and North America, the ones that I'm thinking of specifically. And almost all of their reviewers have come from there, even though their authors may not.
I got you there, Tasha. Thank you so much. Seems like we have connected brainwaves. So for the two main items, it's really the training engagement and of course, increasing reviewers diversification. Thank you so much. I think we'll have to accommodate another question from our audience. Do we have it there? Should I read it? How would you encourage the adoption of open and transparent peer review? It is not something everyone that is comfortable with. I think this directly points to Tasha.
So I would say there is a difference between open and transparent. So you need to decide whether you are publishing the reports with or without the name of the reviewer. And I know a lot of reviewers are very uncomfortable putting their names to a published peer review report, and that is fine. You can still publish the text of the report and introduce transparency in that way. And then as people become more familiar with the concept of publishing the reports, they may well be more willing to put their names to it. I would also personally say that we should be naming the handling editor on every paper to again, open up the process and say, this is the editor that looked after this paper during peer review. If you have any questions, contact them, rather than this very black box approach that we have at the moment. And I know that wouldn't work with double-blind peer review or triple-blind peer review, but this is my ideal future. Open it all up.
Thank you, Tasha. I guess that's sufficiently addresses the question from our audience. Can we have our, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to ask if I could add in one other thing on that, because I think there's an important part there as well of actually, can we get people more comfortable with putting their name to a review report?
Yeah.
You know, because again, we've talked about how you train people in peer review and how lots of this happens through mentoring or co-reviewing, but actually very few people get much feedback on whether they've done a good job as a reviewer or not. And if we could have more feedback processes then people might think, actually, I know I do a good job at this, so I feel better about this being part of my published academic work. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add in that piece.
Yeah. Thank you, Diana. Can we have our second poll question? So this talks about technology. How integrated is technology in your peer review operations? I guess much of this were also initially discussed earlier, but not, again, to Jessica's point, not a silver bullet solution for peer review if the intention is just to cut down the review time. Going once. Twice. Thrice. I think we're excited to see the results because a lot of us are actually really subscribed to technology, but there could be, you know, a population that would be a technology averse for different reasons. Based on your partnership with some other institutions, Tasha, are they subscribing fully to technology as well?
Some are, some are not. There's very many different types of peer review technology that are coming into play. So there's automated technical checks that a lot of people are now implementing. And that's more widely used in my experience than, for example, automated reviewer suggestions. There's different levels of comfort in different organizations. And I would love to know what Jess and Di are doing.
Yeah. Jess, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, and it depends on what type of technology you're talking about here, of course. I have two answers to this. I would have wanted to choose two options. We have run a ton of pilots. I think there's lots of exciting work happening in this space, some really promising work. I think the challenge has been to see it successful at scale. And
Right.
We were talking about format-free submission, which I think is really important to author experience and peer review speed, et cetera. It does make it tricky then on the front end to have tech support faster, more streamlined, smart peer review. So there's a, going back to my favorite word, balance there. We do have some non-integrated tools that we rely on. Some are proprietary, some are developed by other firms. I think that we are right on the precipice as an industry of having more options available to us that can be fully integrated with our core technologies. From my vantage point, we're not quite there yet. There's lots of exciting activity worth looking at piloting, but we're not at a fully plug and play mode yet. I think that's coming.
Thank you there, Jess. Diana, would you have similar thoughts?
Yes, so Tasha actually mentioned two really important areas of tools there. The tools which help you with the automated checks at the beginning of the process, and the tools which sort of use AI to try and suggest suitable peer reviewers. And we've definitely piloted and looked at a lot of these tools because we have in-house people who are expert in both of these processes. So you can do the side-by-side comparison. And I think all of these tools have a lot of promise, and we use some of them to varying degrees. But I think at the moment, from everything I've looked at, none of them are yet at the stage where they can replace a human looking at and using their expertise. Because if you look at tools which look at the initial checks, often they can detect presence or absence of an ethics statement, let's say, but they can't tell you if that ethics statement is required or if it's the right ethics statement for the type of research or not. So those tools are not quite there yet. And I think the same with reviewer suggester tools. They're the beginnings of lots of tools that could go further. But again, they're looking at data sets which are potentially already skewed in terms of certain directions, in terms of diversity, maybe not picking up neuroresearchers. All of the people who we just talked about who we want to engage in the peer review process are often not picked up and suggested by reviewer suggested tools. And I think what will be interesting is how much the big vendors are willing to accept development feedback from people on the ground using these tools and to develop these tools further, because there's a lot of promise, but nothing that is yet replacing the human intervention.
Right. Agree. Let's also see what our audience thinks of this. Do we have the results? Oh, wow, this is an eye-opener for me. So a lot of our audience are now have, embraced fully integrated and functional in terms of technology. So this is quite, a solution to most of the issues that they're seeing. And Diana, you mentioned about, and similar to Tasha's thoughts on pushing, upstream intervention or innovation and technology to ensure that reviewers and maybe editors' effort are reduced. So this is actually one of the endeavors that Straive is looking into right now, how to reduce effort from not only editors and the reviewers but also authors. So more of the technical checks, editorial screening checks that our tools can handle. That is something that we are focusing on. But this is actually really an eye opener for me to see the result from poll question number 2. Thank you so much.
Just before we move on, I know we can't necessarily ask the audience, but I would love to know how many of the people who said that technology is fully integrated and functional were thinking about peer review systems like Editorial Manager or EJ Press, rather than maybe the tools that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Can we have? Would we be able to get a response from that, or maybe later on? I think it is an interesting question also, Tasha, that would like to understand as well. That's why I mentioned eye-opener, because based on my experience, yeah, really we can just implement a tool at the downstream or upstream processes, but not really like the full, value chain. But it would be exciting to understand that later. For our 6th question, this is actually quite interesting. I saw this several times over in some of the recent articles that I've read. Accept to publish has transformed greatly from a technology perspective. What is holding back the submit to accept phase? Where are the bottlenecks? Jessica, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, though I think actually Diana gave the best answer a few moments ago, that while some of the tools that could lead to automation are promising, none of them are at a point where they replace human intervention. And so they're assisting tools, but we still require people to advance papers through. And I think that for a good portion of the peer review process in particular, our goal shouldn't be to automate it and push it forward. I do think that we should put tools in the hands of editors and reviewers that help them evaluate the science, but I don't think we ever want to get to a place where we're making a recommendation on their behalf.
Right. Thank you. Diana, would you like to reinforce that? I guess Jessica's dovetailed that response from you as well. So yeah.
Yes, I think exactly that. People are really, really key. And I think also there's quite a few kind of extra bespoke and complicated elements in peer review, because yes, once you get to typesetting, there could still be subject level variation in the kind of terms that come up, but it can be a lot more automated, whereas actually subject specific requirements in peer review can add extra complexity and extra levels that you have to deal with. And again, it comes back to that technology piece that we talked about earlier. So many of the systems are so complex already, and they're not always set up to have variation and modification put in. So Tasha mentioned earlier about mentoring, and that's brilliant. I haven't yet seen a great way of implementing that in a large scale way in a peer review system that enables two people to co-sign a review, and for that to get co-credit automatically within a system. And so it's kind of this flexibility piece is hard, because what you have to do to get an article from A to B in peer review is already quite complicated. So actually implementing anything that can make changes to smooth that out can be incredibly difficult.
Mhm. Thank you, Diana. Tasha?
I have a slightly different perspective, and I think this comes from the fact that I started in production. And what I've seen in production is that generally we were willing to throw out everything and rethink our workflows from scratch. We literally said, how can we do this in the optimal way using the technology that is now available in, for example, the form of XML first? And that has happened in journals to a much greater extent than it has in books. So the acceptance to publication process for a journal is radically different than it was even 15 years ago. Whereas for a book, it's not quite so different in the majority of cases. My experience running operational sides of peer review is that if you start talking about rethinking workflows in peer review, you get an awful lot of resistance from academic editors, but also from editorial staff internally who are worried about the potential impacts on quality. And that's perfectly valid. You absolutely need to be worried about the impact on quality of content. But it tends to freeze those conversations in a very early stage and restrict the possibilities of really experimenting with different ways to do peer review that will still deliver high quality content. So apologies to anybody who may think I'm being unfair to my editorial colleagues. This is an observation over several decades. So I would love to get involved with somebody who is willing to be a bit more radical in rethinking peer review.
Thank you so much, Tasha. That's basically a different perspective looking at things given your experience in operations. Going on, all right, so it's another time to take on another interesting question from our audience. Are there tools that you have used to measure diversity in reviewers and or editors, or best practices from industry organizations your teams have followed? Diana?
So there are, there's it depends what kind of diversity you're looking at, basically what kind of tool you want to use. If you're just looking at geographical diversity, then your peer review system will often have options for people to input country information or things like that, which you can then use to do more straightforward comparisons. When you're looking at other elements of diversity, particularly if you start looking at gender, then you have to be obviously very careful how you collect and curate that data. Having self-reported data is much better, or using some of the AI tools that are available to be able to do sort of gender matching on the basis of name. It's not a good idea to try and do that in any manual process, because that can lead to biases which can skew your data. But certainly it depends what kind of diversity you're looking at, what your best tool is to do it. But as soon as you're going with any, as soon as you're looking to measure any protected characteristics, be very careful about how you collect that data and how you store it and how you use it.
Thank you, Diana. Jessica, there's one direct question for you. Do you want to answer it? Sure.
Sorry, I lost my Q&A window. Let's see. Oh, yes, I see from Melanie about how do we credit co-review in your peer review system. So I can't remember who said this, but currently in all of the core peer review systems, there's no way to attribute a review to two people. So we accommodate this in one of two ways. It really depends on how it's surfaced to us. Sometimes the advisor or PI comes to us and says, I have a graduate student that would like to contribute to the review of this paper, and suggest them as an alternate, and then we formally invite them. And so it's officially on the record. They're invited as their own discrete reviewer, and they submit their own review. In other cases, and I think this happens a majority of the time, I don't have the data on this, is that the person who is invited to review lets the editor know that they'd like to involve their graduate student, and they go on the record that way, but it's not captured in any real systematic, it's not in the system, it's all done via email. So to your point about, again, apologies, Tasha and Diane, I can't remember who said this, there's not currently a way to sort of collaborate on a review in the systems that we use. So we have some workarounds.
Thank you there, Jessica. I hope that satisfies the question of our audience. Let's proceed to the next question. This is about research integrity. It's becoming a key focus area. Do you see technology playing a role here? Or do we run the risk of systemic biases using trained models for this? Tasha, you look like excited to respond to this question. You go ahead.
I'm pulling faces because all machine learning technology, all artificial intelligence has inbuilt bias because it's programmed by people and people have biases. I do think that there is a role for technology here, but again, we need to open up the black box. We need to be saying, this is the piece of the puzzle that we've used, this is the tool that we have used, and this is the report that came out at the end of it. So again, if you look at what the Microbiology Society is doing with their new open research platform, every article that is submitted is run through a suite of tools, and the reports are being made available to everybody. So you can see what the Penelope tool says about, does this have an ethics statement? Does this have, appropriate references? Does this have all of these things? So there's scope for identifying aspects of a manuscript and whether an article is methodologically sound, but it's only going to work if we let the light in and make sure people who are looking at this content know which tools have been used and know what the potential downsides of those tools are, as well as showing them the outcomes.
Thank you there, Tasha. Jess, would you have another thoughts on that?
I agree that it's a great opportunity to open up the discussion around transparency. It's an area that me and a number of people on my team are very interested in progressing in, but we work in a field, chemistry can be particularly conservative or slow to move on this front. But sort of peeling back the curtain so that readers can make some assessment on their own about the quality, the integrity of the review, of the editor's discernment, what tools were used to evaluate it. So yeah, I did want to second that. I do think that there are tools out there in our own publishing integrity office. We use a couple of different tools to assist our team in evaluating ethical issues. It does come back to a person though. And so this is a really very resource intensive. I think this is true for all publishers. It is still a human resource intensive endeavor that can be supported by tools, but again, can't be replaced by it at this stage.
Thank you. Diana, would you like to share your thoughts?
I mean, lots of the above as well, seconded all of that. I think sometimes as well, working with the transparency piece, one of the challenges can be is that some of the tools being developed, being proprietary, even as the user of the tool, you don't necessarily know exactly on what basis this is flagging up information to you. So it might say that this is, this might be concerning for this area, but you don't necessarily know on what basis it's made that assessment. So actually transparency there would be really helpful as well, because again, as a journal, as a publisher, sometimes you don't know if the tool you're going to implement might have a bias because you don't have full information about what it's actually looking for.
Thank you for that. We're down to our last question, which is pretty much interesting. If you were given a magic wand and had the opportunity to change one thing in peer review as it runs today, what would it be? Tasha?
All of it.
Sure.
Well, just it goes back to what I said earlier. I don't think we've had the kind of radical rethink of peer review that we have of other publishing processes. And peer review, up until the 1960s, we didn't do peer review like this. There is no mystical reason that this is the way it is. So I would like us to have a real think about what we should be doing, why we're doing what we're doing, and what we could change to make it better for everybody. And if I can't have that, can we have openness and transparency, please?
Yes. Thank you for that, Tasha. Jessica, would you like to reinforce that?
All of the above, yeah. Everything we've talked about so far. If I had to pick one thing, just based on some of the things that we are trying to tackle here, and I'm sorry, I'm true to my stripes because I brought this up earlier, it would be reliable natural language processing and metadata extraction so that we could alleviate some of those bespoke bottleneck type processes and really free up our editorial teams to focus on the content. So, but everything else too. But if I just had to pick one, that would be it.
Yeah, thank you. Diana?
I think, again, there's lots of really good points there already, and I wish you can give us all a magic wand and then we can change all of the things that we bring up. I think for me also, a greater collaboration and understanding between academic institutions and publishers about to take peer review activity really seriously as an academic contribution. So focusing in on the peer reviewers and that role that they're doing. I think we've kind of lost our way a little bit on what we're trying to achieve and who it's for. And actually peer review is that assessment process is a positive thing for the whole community. But it can sometimes be seen as, well, academics do it because they feel it's part of their role, but is that being recognized as part of their role? And then sometimes it's seen as something which is done purely for the benefit of the publisher. And of course, publishers do get benefits, but actually it's about reliable research being published. So I think we need that understanding that actually that contribution is important. And I think, as Tasha brought out, a real understanding of what we're trying to achieve with peer review. It's not a box ticking exercise that we just do when we say we've done it. It's supposed to have the purpose of making sure that research is trustworthy to the degree that we can make sure that that's the case. So I think maybe a bit of a rethinking attitude to what peer review is would be my thing.
I get what you're saying, Diana. Thank you. There's one interesting question from our audience and would like to accommodate this. Is there a model where peer reviews can happen before submission to any journal, such that one or more journals can use the outcome for their decision process? So, Jessica, are you good with having
I'll
this
give it a
session?
shot, though I'm not sure it's an answer. I know that some organizations and companies have attempted to commercialize that service, and it hasn't gone well. So I don't know that there is, I don't have an answer here that is very clear one way or the other. I'm certainly open to exploring, but it's been tried before and unsuccessful. And I do think that to build confidence with the editors that you're working with and the communities that you serve, that really needs to be controlled by the journal. That was my prerogative when those services were first introduced, and I think I still hold it, though I'm always open to other perspectives there.
Tasha, go ahead.
Well, to an extent, that's what transfer cascades within journal portfolios do, that you can take the peer review from your flagship journal or from one of your journals and transfer the article and the peer reviews to something that is more suited. Di, you might remember this better than I do. There was something called the Neuroscience Peer Review Consortium, where actually within neuroscience journals across different publishers, they were doing something along those lines, and whichever journal you submitted to, you could transfer elsewhere. But I've not yet seen it happen at scale across multiple publishing houses.
Yeah, again, I would say, I think sometimes, again, that the systems which are already in place lots of the peer review systems that we use assume that a journal is a silo and is going to be doing peer review with an editor and reviewers in one piece. So yes, there's all these transfer processes which are available, and yes, the Neuroscience Consortium is a really great example of a cross-publisher approach to that. But actually transferring the information, making sure that you've got any GDPR requirements, all the consents are in place for that to happen, and then practically how that information moves between systems all becomes very, very difficult very quickly. So again, this would be a nice area for that big rethink of workflows that Tasha was talking about.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, because I agree that we do use this in transfer in theory, when you transfer from one journal to another, cascade, but in practice, a lot of times the receiving journal treats the manuscript anew. So this is what we have observed in our communities pretty consistently. So I just, again, I'm pessimistic on this one.
So
Thank you.
I do just need to note, MECA is an ISO standard for transferring between journals, including the peer review reports. That doesn't necessarily mean that the editors will accept those review reports. And as Di said, making sure that you've got consent from everybody to transfer all of that information is a challenge in and of itself.
Thank you so much, Tasha. We have come to the end of our session. Time flies so fast when you enjoy it the most. I can only surmise one thing. It makes sense to subscribe to technology in collaboration with the human mind to accelerate the proliferation of science or knowledge to the world, but not at the expense of quality. Those who have posted their questions and got no answer, we will connect with you individually through email. Again, this has been a wonderful learning session. I had an awesome time with you all, great minds, our panelists and our audience. We are all here to understand the challenges and opportunities surrounding peer review management. Hopefully, the topic has been satisfied by our panelists earlier. Thank you to my collaborative partners behind the scene, Ritesh, Sitara, Bikash, and KG. And again, thank you to our dear panelists for your expert insights. Tasha, Diana, and Jessica, and to our lively and lovely audience, you surely made this whole conversation meaningful and exciting. If you feel that Straive can help you with any of your related pain points, please connect with us. We are here to connect the dots. This is Felma Magnata signing off and wishing everyone a good rest of the day. Thank you so much.